was established at Infoblox was when I joined. So I had the privilege of having them a part of my whole journey. My background is a combination of different HR functions, from recruiting to HR business partnering to employee programs. And that's really where I think I aligned to ID from the start, is just operationalizing this great tool. I have a special passion for organizational development and kind of the human psychology behind all things. I had my master's in OD, and so understanding why people do different things and how they approach their job is just a natural fascination for me. So I naturally am drawn to this type of tool, and I really find it to be spot on for a lot of people. Most people, after I've talked to them about their ID, go, yes, that's me. And one of the early things that I leverage, and I was talking to Vicki the other day about really understanding the ID for yourself. I think for me, it grounded in understanding how I can be successful. In my previous role at the company before Infoblox, I was inundated with requests. I was very reactive to the business as HR business partner. 12 hours of my day was doing meetings and filing requests for individuals in the business. And I didn't have kind of the organization to do my own kind of tasks that I was signed up to do. So when I leveraged ID and understood what the 7563 meant for me, it was to allow myself time and energy to get myself organized first, and then I could show up better for everybody else. As HR, as a service organization, we often are pulled into everybody else's fires quickly, but establishing like a 30-minute beginning of the day task list for myself just brought a whole new calm to how I approach the job every day. That has been life-changing. I would say I feel more organized, I feel more on top of things, I'm able to discern what is most important for that day. I find accomplishments when I get some of my task lists to do. I think my 6 for use complete is probably what I'm known for at Infoblox, is getting over the finish line, driving for progress, and I get a lot of joy out of it. I naturally love it. So I think for me, learning what my ID is and how I can bring my talents to the organization has really thrived with the ID program. We started by a cascading approach where all of the executive team was first inundated with ID. They have it as part of their offsites every quarter. They're all very familiar with what their ID means and how they work with each other. And then what we did first was actually had a leadership forum with our directors and above, so that the next level of leaders really understood this program, how to become better leaders, leveraging their own ID and knowing the differences of their teams. Paul mentioned we had a little pause in the middle of that. So once we had the go and the green light, what we did is incorporated that into our onboarding program, so that individuals who are joining the organization knew from the beginning what their ID was, how they can show up to be the most effective in their role, but it also gives a little insight to their manager on how to manage them, how to communicate with them. I think communication for a new person is often hard because you don't know where their insights are and how they show up. So ID gives them a quick tool to build that relationship quicker. From there, we've done a series of employee trainings, manager trainings. We do team sessions. Paul and team have done kind of deep dives for a lot of the organization. So it really becomes part of that second language that we have within the organization, and we have it embedded in our Outlook and email signature. So we try to really blend it into all elements of the organization so people are very familiar with it. It's one of those programs that I could probably talk about all day, every day with anybody. And when I talk to them on my one-on-ones, I often reference the ID platform and show how they can use it to either work better with their coworker or their teammate. So I really enjoy it. I think I could welcome questions, but that's been the experience thus far, and definitely have found personal insights from it as well to be better at what I am as an HR professional.
Thanks, Jen. That's a great intro. I mean, what I really took from that right up front was put your own oxygen mask on first. Whether you're going to be the person who takes it through an organization, or whether you're just trying to use it with your family or in your team, one, using it for yourself so that you're getting something from it and that you're at your best, just to do whatever you're going to do, that's really the place to start. It's not selfish. It's actually the way to give your best self to whoever is around you, you know. So great message, great message. In terms of the penetration through info blocks, I remember one time, I think you have a goal, don't you, about what the coverage needs to be? What's the number?
So our internal goal is 80% of the organization to have done and understand their ID. And I believe, and Vicki could probably keep me honest here, I think we're about 82%. And then we fluctuate around that number every quarter, just as we've had a lot of new hires come through the doors in recent quarters. I think we had 120 the previous quarter and 150 the quarter before. So a lot of the discrepancy is just the new people, getting them on board and getting them familiar with ID. But I would say we're pretty astonished by how many people have signed up, know their ID, and it's really, you know, the individuals that have been here for a really long time that weren't captured in either the leadership cascading or the onboarding process that might still be unfamiliar with ID. But I'm pretty proud of that, because we were probably in the low 10s or 20s when I first joined. So we've really grown that number up to meet that goal.
I thought that was really interesting. I remember your sort of woohoo, you know, when we got above the 80%. So I have a few questions here for Jen, but I'm going to open this up for you guys to ask any questions that you would like to ask of her as well. And some of you might have some perspectives, because we've done similar work in other organizations. If you'd like to share any of your own perspective, there's room and time for that too today. Jen, in terms of how you onboard people, how do you do that? Like, do you have a buddy system, or is it just all led from HR? How do you maybe talk to the team about how do you do it so you keep it alive with the new people coming through with that amount of growth and new hires all the time?
Yeah, we have a pretty comprehensive onboarding program that a lot of the different functions of HR help to execute. So we have our day one orientation that our talent operations team facilitates. So the new hire is familiar with the company or familiar enough with the programs, kind of given their benefit information and their IT. In that session, we actually highlight the ID program as one of the key programs for employees to accelerate their collaboration and really aligning to the cultural values here at Infoblox. So we introduce it during that first conversation with a new hire. But then we also have an online self-learning path via our LMS, where we have a course in there which describes what the ID program is. We have them complete the assessment and actually require it as part of their onboarding, which should be completed within their first week. So within, you know, the first 2 to 3 days, they've already had 2 touch points on what the ID is and how it references our culture and our behavior within Infoblox. From there, we have quarterly sessions that we talk about ID. We do have a buddy system and also a manager portion of their onboarding, where they're encouraged to talk about the programs and what it's like to be a Bloxer, we call them. So we have kind of a comprehensive approach from HR to, you know, online learning, so they could do it at their own pace with their manager and buddy to really support them. And then after about 90 days, we circle back with them. So we have this program called Circle Back, and we check in with the new hire and the manager on how their experience has been. So if you have them reflect on the recruiting experience, on the onboarding experience, and really have them think through what that experience was like, we get that detailed and kind of modify the program each quarter. But what is kind of overwhelming in that response is people love it, and they're very grateful to have joined a company that values collaboration, values the culture, and really focuses on bringing somebody in to be successful into the organization. So we found it to be pretty positive and a great selling point for bringing people on.
Jen, given the 80% of, you know, the employees or a little bit north of that have done their ID, what's the overall reaction? You know, is it generally positive? How would you describe how it lands for the vast majority of people?
I would say it lands very well. I think when they first go through it, there's usually some aha moments and some light bulbs that go off. And I think the more you talk about it, the more it sticks. So if, you hear about it once and you never hear about it again, it becomes a tool you forget about. So our program is really trying to embed it in different parts of the employee life cycle so it remains fresh and relevant in the employee's day. So I think it depends on the comprehension of the ID and how much focus time they have at the beginning to really get it. There's individuals that, if they don't agree with a certain number, they're a little less likely to be on board with the program. But I found once you talk them through what their ID means, usually you get the light bulb and you're like, oh, okay. And to me, I live for those moments when I see the light bulbs go off. And then I always have our account rep, Vicky, as a backup, well, if they need more conversation or more in-depth analysis of their own ID. So I find it fun just to get to know people and kind of see their light bulbs go off.
I don't know if I've told you this, Jen, but one of the, a few years ago, I had the lady who's at the head of HR at Cisco, Fran Katsoudas, who's a really good friend of mine. I had her attend our conference and she was speaking to my team and my team wanted to sort of know, like, so what's been the value of using ID for so long and so pervasively and yada, yada. And she said, well, and we were looking for something really sophisticated, like a metric, and she said, well, let's just start with the most simple but profound thing. Everyone likes it. And we were looking for something really big, and she was like, it's just cool when you're in HR, like you try and launch these programs and they get very lukewarm responses, to have something that generally, like for the vast majority of people, is really well received, just that is refreshing, just that is positive, and frankly, just that's really valuable, because if you have success with something, it then gives room to launch other programs that might be well received because it gives you more credibility. And I think we should be careful not to overlook that value, because it brings positive energy into the organization. Just before I open it up, go on, sorry, Jen, go.
Oh, what I was going to say is I think having a tool to explain yourself to others, I find that individuals find that very kind of comforting. So to describe why I'm a 7.563, I'm able to articulate it better and clearer versus just be demanding or, my personality. So it gives it's almost like a permission slip to, seek what you need to be successful. And I think people really enjoy that kind of that vocabulary to do it.
Well said, well said. So does anyone have any questions that they would like to ask of Jen? You just need to take yourself off mute first if you'd like to ask a question.
Jen, this is Marlys. I'm curious, I get asked this question a lot, especially with new hires. Do you ever get feedback just on other assessments? Because, there's so many different assessments out there. So one of the things, we always address is that there are a lot of different types of assessments that really get to different things. So sometimes I find the strong verifiers maybe initially skeptical because they've taken other assessments. So I'm curious how you manage those types of questions that might come up.
Yeah, I think one of the slides I've received from the ID group is the core slide, where the instinctive drives is your core self. So I described that if you think back to your natural self when you were a child, how did you show up? How do you prefer? That's really what the ID assessment's trying to focus on, where the other assessments can be behavioral, it could be kind of learned practices. And I always talk to Myers-Briggs. I often change my Myers-Briggs numbers all the time, and depending on if I'm more introverted or extrovert, depends on what's going on in the world and where my stress level is. And so I don't find it very validated. So it changes for me all the time. Where I find this one hasn't changed. It stays true to who I am and who I've been for always. So I kind of talk to, everything is good to know about yourself. All of them can be leveraged together. You just have to look at them differently and what they're being used for. And I use this one as your core self and what you need to be successful. The others are around learned behaviors, how you show up in the world. So knowing about yourself is always a great step, and all the tools can be leveraged in different ways. So I kind of talked to just the variety of that. That usually works. But I hear you, there are some skeptics out there.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Marlys. Good to see you on the call, Marlys.
Yes, Thank you.
So that, for those, just to introduce Marlys to you. So Marlys is our Gen equivalent at Amazon. Marlys, you too grabbed this. Well, is Chris your boss or a colleague? What's your?
Yes, he is. He is my boss.
So I've told the story to some people about Chris. So I knew Chris from Cisco, and he started at Amazon several years ago, and he just started using the ID, and I had no idea he was using it until my team sort of gave me a prompt that, Paul, they've used over 200 IDs or something, so maybe you should get in touch with Chris. So I rang Chris and had a chat to him, visited Seattle, and so Chris is a strong authenticator, and he has done the most fantastic job of promulgating this through his organization as a tool that's very alive. And then, I think with wanting to continue it on, ask Marlys to be his support person equivalent to Jen to help drive it through, or not really drive it, but to onboard people and help it sort of be administered through the organization. So how long does that go back, Marlys? Is that several years too?
Yes, it's coming up to about 5 years for me. Wow. And I think when I joined, that's when it was at the early stages of being brought into the team. So we do a similar thing to you, Jen, is bringing all of our new hires that join our team, get an ID. We have a monthly overview session that I facilitate or a member of my team facilitates. And it's a great pivot point to actually introduce it when people are brand new to the group. We found that's the best time because they're open, they have time, they're getting to know everyone, and it's been a great way to at least fast track them to get to know their peers a little bit more and their manager as well.
So Chris used to do those monthly meetings, didn't he?
Yes. So we have just gotten so big that he can't always make all of them, but we definitely have a senior leader that sits in on every meeting, and we have them share how they use ID, what they've learned from it, how they can gain value from it. So it helps new people to see one of the leaders talk to how they use it, and just some practical tips really to help them start using it.
I thought it was very cool. When I was there, I visited Seattle one time, and so I did one of those monthly meetings with Chris. And his way is he stands up there and says, "Well, I'm Chris. This is my ID. It's all about being an authenticator. Our values here at Amazon are all about trust, transparency, authenticity. Like, hello, that's who I am. And by the way, here's my wife's ID, and here are my kids, and this is how we play as a family." And it's just a very real, practical, vulnerable, and authentic representation, not only of who he is as a leader, but of their culture as a company. And people just resonate with it straight away. I think it's one of the nicest ways to be onboarded into an organization is to see that culture alive and well, not only in the group, but in a person like that. So I love the way you guys are doing it there as well. In fact, it's a question, Jen, to come back to you for a second. I was going to ask you about the value of having executive sponsorship, because you do have the benefit of a CEO and a leadership team who are, for the most part, very, very passionate about this as a tool, a process, and part of the culture of the business. And then, a little further down. So we've done sort of higher touch at the top, and then it's run more internally through the organization. Tell us a little bit about the value for you, what, of having that level of executive sponsorship, or how important has that been if you were, coaching others on this or telling that story? How important is that?
Yeah, I think it's critical. If they didn't support it, it would just be another HR program that's offered that may not be leveraged. So I think our success rate over 80% is really attributed to their focus on it, their use of it, their passion for it. So I know each of our executives are passionate about their own ID. They bring it in and make sure everybody on their team is successful in understanding what ID means. So had they not been supported from the front and continued to support the program, it would just be another program that I offer that wouldn't have as much as we've had. So, I really think a lot of our success has been because they sponsor it and support it and build it into their culture of their different teams.
Yeah, I think that's been huge. Okay, any other questions for Jen?
Hi, Jen. This is Pam Jacoby.
Hi.
Link up. So I'm wondering what are some of the features on our platform that you find most useful?
So for new hires, I like to show them the report section. So that's usually one of the first tabs I go to, just so that they understand how to find their talents, their vulnerabilities, how they can share their information with their manager, their team. So I usually start there. For managers and above, I like to show the ID culture tab where they can build their team culture. They usually light up with that they can actually come up with some key elements to manage their team better, and they actually can pull it right out of the platform. So I found those two to be probably the most used. However, the HR business partner team leverages the side-by-side comparison a lot. So if there's internal conflict or misunderstandings, they generally will pull up the side-by-side to compare the two IDs and talk through a resolution. So that is kind of one of the tools that they find very useful when there are some, differences of personalities or IDs, because it usually can be attributed to just seeing the world differently. So those are kind of the three that I use a lot within the platform. And then I love the Outlook plugin. I use that all the time. And I talk to how beneficial that is when you don't get to see somebody in the hallway and get to know them. You really can pull up 4 quick points of how to communicate to them and be successful. And that one to me is always fun and really easy to use.
So just to be clear for others who may not be as familiar with that tool. So if you, excuse me, in Outlook, you can go into Microsoft and there's a little add-in or a plug-in that you can download that connects the ID platform to your Outlook calendar and email, so that as you're typing an email to somebody, you can have a little pop-up window show you, what are the key bullets to keep in mind when you're communicating with that person. Hey, Andy, I see you made a point about personality. It might be interesting for you just to elaborate for the team. You said in the chat that it's so much more than personality. Tell us about your perspective on that.
Yeah, sure. Also, I suppose I should put myself on video. Don't mind me sitting in bed, you guys. No, so I think, one of the biggest light bulbs, to speak to Jen's point about, using the ID. When I was going through the champion program, we were allowed to have people in our family take the IDs. And so I had my mom take it, currently living at home after graduating from college, and mother and daughter bond, it's there. But there was some contention. I thought, hey, this is a great way to maybe figure out where's that maybe coming from. Come to find out, she and I have almost the exact same ID, but we couldn't be further apart in personality. I'm very loud. I'm very out there. I like give it to me straight. I think a lot of my friends, when they found out that my mom and I have the same ID, they're like, what? My mom is very soft spoken. She's very motherly, very nurturing. If a kid falls down, she doesn't know the kid, but she's running up to are you okay? Is it, what can I do to help? If I see a kid fall down, I'm like, oh, is there a parent around? I don't know. So just, we couldn't be more different on the offset, but to have the same personality, or to not the same personality, but the same ID, I started seeing the similarities. Oh, that's why she thinks that way. But it comes across differently because of how she was brought up versus how I was brought up, et cetera, et cetera. I'm seeing some nods on the video call, so I feel like maybe I'm not the only one who's had that what kind of moment. But love my mom. I'm so glad I had her take the ID test, though. That it's really helped us have that common language and be able to really kind of see things from the same perspective now.
And what's your ID, Andy?
7672.
Yeah, it is so cool, isn't it? Because you can. It also gives you another way to connect to your mum. Whereas you could sort of not write it off, but you could say, yeah, she's my mum and I love her and all that. But we're so different. But it's actually really nice to then see what are some things where you are the same, and you can bond on those and still maintain your unique individuality on the other hand. That's a really cool perspective. Thanks for sharing it.
I'll just add to that. I had my sister take it when I did the ID champion, and she's a 4, 5, 3, 6, I think, from memory. And so she's complete opposite to me, but I love her view of the world. And so what I always talk about ID is I love to partner with people that are different than I am, so they can help complete the world picture for me. So, you know, I have my talents, but I also love to leverage those that are so different from me. Like Vanessa on the team, she's a high use improvise. I think you're a 7 or 8, Vanessa. You might be able to put it in the chat. But I love going to her with some bright ideas. I'm like, hey, Vanessa, what's this about? Can you think? So, you know, to just to build on Andy, to leverage those that are similar, but also to partner with those that are different, have been just very enriching.
Yeah. Well, you know, it goes to that point where people talk about, you know, I tolerate the differences, or I want a way to cope with them. And my whole mantra always is to be in awe of the differences. You know, get to a point where you feel that you can never be another person. We can't be a 10 in everything, but by leveraging others and working with them from a place of being in awe is how you get to be the 10 out of 10 on everything, you know, the combined sort of bigger person. That's really cool. So Vanessa just said her ID is 7526. So yeah, it's so funny. I had someone yesterday who's a 5 incomplete, and their leader said, "Oh, that's really surprising. I would have thought they're a much stronger completer than a 5." I said, "Well, you're a 2. Anyone else probably looks like a strong completer to you." So you can. It's interesting. Even a 6 compared to Jen as a 2, it's a 3. It, you know, even that is a difference that's worth leveraging. And maybe if she was an 8 or a 9, it might be too strong, Jen. You know, it might be really different. But that's a nice blend for you. So an ID like that, you can connect through the verify drive and authenticate very similar. So you're nicely similar in some areas, and there's a nice difference to leverage on the other hand. You know, that's really cool. It makes sense why it would work so well. Okay, is there another question for Jen?
Hey, Jen, I'm actually curious.
Sorry,
if you don't mind.
Yeah,
go
I'm
Andy.
going to continue to be a loudmouth today, I guess. Is there a light bulb moment, Jen, that you've seen that you wish other people got to sooner? Like, is there one light bulb moment that you wish people had right away?
I wish that they had the light bulb of how they can be better for their own ID. So, you know, having the kind of the connection to their own number quicker, because once that happens, I think people grab on and really understand it and realize how beneficial this program is. You know, for me, it was, you know, allowing myself breathing room in the morning. And Andy knows, I'm like, don't talk to me before 9. I'm going to do my email. So, you know, just protecting what you need to be successful, whatever that is for your ID. If people caught on to that quicker, they would see how life-changing it could be for them. And they could operate as a 10, as Paul mentioned, every day versus, you know, when we hear like a 5, a 6, or a 7, they're you know, they're in it, but not 100%. And I love Paul's one speech was, if you showed up and were a 10 every day, how would that impact the world? I mean, if I showed up as a 10 and Andy showed up as a 10 and Vanessa did too, we would just emulate this passion and energy that would be infectious for the whole company. And I like that challenge back to people. How do you show up to be your best self? So I steal that from you, Paul.
It was always there to be stolen. I probably stole it from somebody else. Just pass it around. Hey, Andy, that sounded like a loaded question, though. I wanted to hear what you sound like you had something in mind with that question too.
I think it just, again, goes back to personality. I partner very closely with engineering at Infoblox, and I think I have received pushback on it. They kind of brush it off pretty frequently, saying like, I don't need a personality test. I know who I am, thank you. And it's like, okay, but it's not a personality test. Like, and I have to kind of push it as more of a, hey, this is a communication tool. Communicating is really important, especially across the different teams. Why would you not want to leverage something that can give you guys the cutting edge and really get ahead of the other teams? Then it's like, oh my, well, we should take it. Oh my God, we should take it.
Oh, kudos to you. Kudos to you for finding another. I've often said you want to get inside the house. It doesn't really matter whether you come in through the front door, the back door, or a window, or down the chimney. You just want to get in somehow. And if they won't let you in the front door, you know, kudos to you for finding a way down through the chimney or the back door or somewhere. But once you get in there, you know, it's always enriching for people. So that's really good. Good to hear. So I want to just shift gears for a bit and now talk about maybe key learnings, Jen. You know, you've got 4 years under your belt. If we picked up from Infoblox and were to go somewhere else and said, right, let's do the same thing, but we want to do it faster. To institutionalize this into an organization, so Infoblox has how many people? About 1,000, bit over 1,000 people, is it?
Yeah, about 1,200, approaching 13 now, but yeah.
Okay, so, and fast growth. I mean, actually, we probably should sort of highlight that in terms of some of the benefits, and maybe talk a little bit about what's going on for the company right now in terms of growth and brand. It'd be fair to say it's probably in the best position that anyone's ever seen it right now. Would you say that?
Yeah, I mean, we just won, or we were just noted in the best place to work survey, I believe last week or early this week. So
What survey was it?
the best places to work with Inc. magazine. So culture, I would say we've transitioned really well with this COVID-19, and I think it has to do a lot with how the culture was established. So I think one of the key wins that, you know, Jesper and the executive team established was a value system that incorporated communication and collaboration and working together. And I think those that enjoy working at Infoblox are those that really like the partnership and working across different parts of the organization. I think the early wins, as we noted earlier, was the executive team support. I think that was paramount in the program. I think lessons learned is the legacy group that may not have been captured in one of our programmatic approaches, how to catch them up so they feel a part of the go forward. I feel in reflecting, maybe we forgot about them or didn't incorporate a process to get them involved quicker. So that would probably be a learning point, is just somebody that had a longer tenure, but not necessarily in a management or a new hire position, that we had a program built for them. And then I'd probably just do more team sessions and just have like more of an aggressive goal to get out there and get the training available to people quicker. So I'd probably just do more amping on that so that we can really touch the globe. The different HR business partners and talent operations members have participated in the ID Champion. I would probably, you know, have them have completed that quicker, so they are true champions and passion ambassadors for the program as well. But you know, you live and you learn, right?
How long would you think it would take to institutionalize it? If you had your time again, you sort of want to get it to a point where it's a common language, and we get the executive team on board, so you've got that sponsorship. What do you think the journey, how long is that journey typically to get where you are today?
I think if all went well, probably a year to get through the organization at the size we're at, just to get to, you know, every level. The managers and the executive levels, they're probably the easiest because they're accustomed to learning and attending training, but really to penetrate to the field sales, to the individual contributors, that this may not be a part of their day job. That's probably where we could probably add it a little bit more approach to.
Okay, thanks, Jen.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ian, I have a feeling you had a question before that I forgot to come back to.
No, that's okay. It was just, it was actually from Greg. He was just wondering, he was really looking to, probably from Jen, and also maybe Marlys might have some insights. How do they incorporate the ID just basically in their day-to-day trainings and meetings?
I'll start. So we have it for, as part of the learning path on onboarding, we have the HR business partners all teed up to become ID champions. So they have quick manager trainings for newly hired or promoted managers they talk about. We do quarterly trainings with Vicky for employees. I've been actually forwarding these sessions to our employee bases so that they have an opportunity to learn more about ID. And then we just talk about it wherever we can, especially as, you know, situations come up and opportunities come up. And then we started really at the executive level, did some manager and director level training, and cascaded down as the first kind of big push that we had with the organization. So kind of an element of all different levels. We had a different, but happy to elaborate if you want to connect after.
I think some of the things that we do here, similar to Jen, we do with our onboarding process, we bring people into ID for the first time there. I also facilitate sessions with new teams. So teams that are just starting to form. I'm doing one in about a week that's just about working better together and understanding stressors and motivators for those groups. So that's something we do. And sometimes it's just one-on-one coaching. If people are at the pivot point in their career, there's some great material on leveraging ID in looking at your career and decisions that you might make. So use it for that. And then I also share it with leaders who might be having some conflict with, other perhaps people on their team. Just again, as Andy said, like as a communication tool. So using the ID, using the resources to help you maybe approach a conversation a different way, or just kind of breaking through some of those pain points. I think there's some super practical tips that feel very accessible to people. And it's just sometimes kind of bringing that in as a tool to help them have those conversations.
Actually, I was meaning more, how do you use it when you're running the business? That question was more like, how does ID show up? Not how do you train it and teach people about ID, but how is ID applied in your day-to-day meetings and your reviews of people's work and handover jobs and scoping your projects and things like that? How does it show up in action as a tool for the business?
I'll start. So
Okay.
for us, I think it becomes a common language. I know for individuals that are very familiar with ID, they'll call out when their drives are being used. So today I'm going to use my use verify, and I'm going to ask a lot of questions. So bear with me. So it's kind of setting up the conversation for success. So I've seen it play that more frequently. I know Paul and Vicki know that we've actually looked at the IDs to form different Tiger teams for different groups. So we have a business council that runs the different programs in the organization. We really look at the IDs across the groups to see what would benefit a project group moving forward. And then sometimes with mentorships and coaching, we'll look at that as well to either pair somebody similar but a little bit different so that they get to see the world from a different perspective. So those are some of the ways that we use ID every day. And I think it really comes out in the language when somebody really connects with it and understands it.
Right, thank you.
We also use it just in feedback conversations. So when we are approaching annual reviews, we often bring that into just how you prepare for your review conversation, because of course, depending on how someone is wired, you might need to prepare a little bit differently for that conversation. So we kind of bring it in that aspect as well. Just different cycles and programs throughout the year. It's super useful for that.
So we have a question. Go Claudia.
Thank you, Paul. I've got a comment and a question. Jen, the lessons learned that you've mentioned, I'm sorry, I'm a change practitioner. So the lessons learned you've mentioned, they actually relate to change management processes. I thought that was very interesting. So like your ID champions will be your change agents or your change networks that you build. So the question that I have for you is, you mentioned culture a few times, and as a change practitioner, I work with culture quite a lot. So my question is, how did you see IDs being used to drive a desired culture within your organization?
Yeah, I would say, one of the things is we established the cultural values early on, and it's transparency, absolute integrity, collaboration. And I think those are things that are elevated and highlighted with the ID program. So it just matched really well to some of the pillars that we had at our company. And our leaders really exude those values. So to us, it was a natural partnership of the two, the program and the culture. I think we leverage ID to highlight kind of reinforcing cultural values if somebody goes array or might not be showing up that way. So we remind them through ID and our values that, our culture here is to be collaborative, it's to be transparent, it's to be open, and here's a tool that you can use to be that. And then our ID champions are really the experts within the organization that understand it and can talk through leadership. Generally, there are HR business partner unit that are already partnering pretty strongly with the leadership group. So they are built into the offsites, the team meetings, and really have a voice and an eye for what's going on in the team dynamics, if there's anything on the ground that they need to work with. And then, I think I've mentioned the executive team are strong advocates for it. So with that, there's a little bit of, hierarchical change as well. Just if they support it, it'll get supported in the organization. Does that answer some of your question? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting that you might talk to who do you have as the ID champions, Jen? Because I think from memory, it's all of the HR business partners have all gone through the ID champion training, but then there are other people as well that are almost like high potentials that get identified from different teams that have an interest in this area too, is it not?
Yeah, so our first approach was the HR business partners, just because they do conflict resolution every day with the business, and they're often partnering with the leaders at every level, from first level manager up to the executive. So our first pass was to get them through it. We also had our talent operations team go through it, who are onboarding the organization so that they're equipped to articulate the program from the beginning. So that was kind of our second wave. And then third was our cultural ambassadors. So people that really reflect the culture we want to be, are passionate about this. We found people at different sites and within the organization that kind of would support the program, are passionate about the culture, and really reflect what we want to kind of keep going throughout the organization. And I found that people that are passionate about it generally talk about it and advocate for it and really show up well. And we probably have 15 to 20 in the organization, just kind of scattered throughout the different business units and sites, so that everybody understands it at the different levels and can be reached out to if needed.
Great. Thank you, Jen. We've got time for maybe a couple more questions, and then we're going to have to start to wrap. So does anyone have anything they'd like to ask, whether it's Jen or Marlys or anyone else on the call that's been sharing? Okay, so I have a question around culture, which I could ask. I'll start with you, Jen, but I'd be interested in what Marlys might share here too. So when you think about the culture that exists, so you have the cultural values that you had before we got involved. I think there's 7 key values that are part of the culture that are really alive at Infoblox. And you look at the culture that's been developed now. And I look at you as a company, so this is just my outside perspective. I'd be interested to get it from you, authentically and with the group. I see a company that's in fast growth. So firstly, you're a global company and you're truly global. You've got people that are represented from right across the board. It's not like where the epicenter is in one location and it's taken global. It really is a legitimate global business. Fast growth and high growth. You're in at least double digits and some really impressive numbers, while you've been pivoting the business as well to a completely different revenue model. You've just been voted best place to work. And I see other companies doing fast growth and high growth, but I also see a lot of burnout. And I would say one of the things that to me seems to be setting Infoblox apart right now is that it doesn't feel like there's massive burnout. I see people working hard, but I think there's a very big difference between working hard when you're in stride and feel like you've got the freedom to be in stride, versus people who are grinding so far out of stride. So if you're like an 8 or 9 out of 10, that's a lot less painful than when you're a 4 out of 10 on our peak performance scale and grinding hard. What would you say to that? Does it feel like for all of the growth and the hard work, burnout is relatively low as an issue within the business, or is it actually still a relevant issue that's quite commonplace when you've got that sort of growth?
We live in stressful times, so I do think there are elements of the organization that are, fully stretched. I think one of the things I will say Infoblox as well is we focus on well-being. And I'll, you know, do a shout out to Brenda, who runs our benefits team, has done an amazing job setting up a culture that really wants our employees to be well. And we have a lot of programs, including ID, that really support the overall well-being of a person. So, you know, from mental wellness to physical wellness to, you know, just ensuring your family is safe and feeling good. That's at the heart of who we are here at Infoblox, and supported in all we've done, especially in this COVID world. And our focus the last month or two has really been ensuring that we've transitioned in this stressful time as successfully as possible by supporting employees with programs, one of them being ID, just so people can communicate and know what they need to be successful. But, you know, mental wellness, health wellness, all of that is part of the culture that I think has helped maybe minimize the stress and the burnout. Not to say that it's not there in some cases, and we've definitely been through a lot of change in the last few years, but I would say those have helped support the organization, especially those that needed it. I mean, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of stress in the world. We live in a high volume world and environment. So there's definitely stress, but I think those support it when the employees need it. So we're not perfect, but we do have programs that support when needed.
Yeah, that's really cool. It certainly feels to me on, you know, I mean, we support you, but we also still have a lot to do with various business units within the business. And it's something that stands out to me that is quite different to other clients that we're supporting, is that you've got a lot of great growth going on, which is stressful in one way, but it doesn't have the same draining, exhausting feel as it can have elsewhere, you know. So I think that's testimony to the way you go about taking care of your people. I see we have one more question, which I'll just, I think it's a question actually directed at me. Paul, have you seen the ID of the business leader drive the articulated culture and values of the business, or does it more align to the whole business ID profile? That is an awesome question. It's something that actually fascinates the hell out of me as to how can one person in charge of, I've seen it happen where a leader is in charge of 70,000 people, and their leadership influence is a shadow across the entire business community. You know, I find that fascinating about leadership and the incredible influence that one person or one team can have on the business. I think when it comes to the, I've studied culture a lot, and I would say there are generally, the cultural elements of a business are normally, you know, held by probably less than half a dozen people in the business, typically the CEO or key leader, but then there are normally just 4 or 5 other key, like, you know, fingers of the same hand, the key people in the business, not always on the executive team, but they're very influential people in the business. And I'd say collectively, those people pretty much define the culture. The key is understanding who they are, and they might be positive influences or they might be negative detractors of the culture, but it's identifying who those top 4 or 5, 6 people are. It's not, you know, 20 or 50. It's just a handful, literally a handful, that can pretty much define the culture that promulgates the entire organization. Ideally, they will be singing from the same hymn book about the same positive influence on the culture. I think, you know, Infoblox, as an example, they've done a very, very good job of that. And you have a very, like, Jesper is, you know, a strong authenticator. He's made his ID quite public, but, you know, authenticate and improvise. He's very clean, very transparent, very big on accountability. And I think you can see the personal qualities that you see in him, including well-being and quality of life. You see that then promulgated through the business. So I can see it from the leader down in that case, but I would say also it's shared by several other key influential people in the company. So guys, we're right out of time. Thank you so much for being on the call. I want to say a very special thank you to you, Jen, for sharing all of those insights. Marlys, thank you for sharing what you shared from your perspective, because you've, as I say, you're a kindred spirit with Jen. You guys maybe should spend some time together. You've probably got a lot you can share and help each other with. Andy, for what you shared, and for each of the rest of you, you know, your questions, whether they're in the chat or on the call, it's been a great experience, and I hope you've gotten something valuable from it. Thanks for being on the call. As I said, next week we've got, well, for the next 8 weeks, we're going to do a deeper dive on each of the 8 directions of the ID. I'll make sure it's got real nuances around it that are really insightful for you. and some really interesting stories that could be good to share and you know, take home and use yourself. So hopefully it'll be really valuable for you. Look forward to seeing you on those calls as well. Take care, guys. Have a great day.
Thanks, Paul.
Bye.
Cheers.
See you. Thank you. Awesome session.